Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so before the introduction, I just need to let you know that if you have questions during Linda's presentation, please just write them in the chat. I will be watching the chat and interrupting her at times that are appropriate to give her the questions. So get your chat bar open so you're ready to write if you have something that you need to know, or just wait until the end of Linda's presentation and ask the questions then. Okay, so now it's really my pleasure to introduce Linda Papanicolau. She's an American art historian, artist, and poet with a PhD from New York University. She worked for the Metropolitan Museum of Art, then taught art in New York and California schools. And that's where she discovered haiku in the 1990s. Since then, her haiku and her graphics, including haiku-related poetry, are widely published in print and in online journals nationwide. Linda lives in Palo Alto, where she is president of the Bay Area-based Yuki Tike Haiku Society. They have members from all over the world. There is more information about Linda in our newsletter and lots of information about Linda online. So if you want to know more about her. Linda today will show us ways to put our words and images together without destroying our paintings. So please welcome Linda Papanicolau.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to do a share now. Let's see, and let me get into it. I should have set it up while you were talking, so bear with me. Well, wait a minute, because it's not in the folder that I thought it was going to be. Hold on, let me do a search. Okay. There we go. And here we are. Okay. Does everybody see the title slide right now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just going to say it will help you to know a little bit more deeply about who I am and how I came not only to Haiga, but also to Sumi-e. And precisely what I thought I would, with sort of feedback from Dorothy on how to sort of target this talk directly to your interests. As she said, I'm a former art teacher, retired now, and how I found haiku is that way back, probably late 1990s, I was about ready to give a 5th grade art lesson, and I was planning on doing leaf printing with them because it was fall, about this time of year, October. And so I collected a lot of leaves and read the lesson plan, and down in the bottom of the lesson plan, well, after all the instructions for doing leaf printing and everything, down in the bottom was what we call an extension, which suggested we'll have the kids write some haiku to go with their leaf prints. Okay, 575 cinch. Okay, let me do that. That sounds fun. And the leaf prints turned out very beautifully. And the haiku, there was only one that was passable as a haiku, and the rest were just simply floundering. And I looked at the results and thought, well, if I do this lesson this way again, I'm clearly going to have to learn a little bit more about haiku. So I started Googling online and trawling back and forth looking. I found there was a substantial online haiku community, even though it was centered at the old Yahoo groups and on the Shiki listserv in those days. And I identified people, found that whose work I liked. I found the World Haiku Club, signed up for the beginners group. And so Anya, who's now Bend, Oregon, kind of in your region, was one of the mentors. And so she really became my first teacher. As it turned out, I never taught that lesson again. But here I am 25 years later, still doing haiku. I became more or less a haiga specialist because after the World Haiku Club Beginners Group, I rolled over into a Yahoo group for World Haiku Club called Haiku Multimedia. And for many years, I did not exactly photo haiku because I'm not really good enough as a photographer. But I used Photoshop and apps for filtering and artsying up the images. And throughout most of my career, that's where I have gone, digital photography, photo-based images and found images with online apps. But about several years ago, I signed up for an ink brush painting class at Stanford. My teachers are Taiwanese, and so I've learned kind of a Chinese rather than a Japanese style, but that really got me thinking of putting the two together. And what I intend to do today is talk to you particularly on the assumption that whether you do also photo haiku or not, and I mean, notice I'm calling them photo haiku rather than haiga or photo haiga. The ga in haiga means painting. And it's been said by purists, so, haiga is not photo. So I have used a term that I think I found from Michael Dillon Welsh, that to just call it photo haiku or photoku. Because I believe that when you start with a photo-based image, the process of selecting or writing a poem to the image and compiling them is fundamentally different than when you start with a painting. So that is what I'm starting with a painting is what I'm going to be talking about today, and a little bit about the traditional method of just simply pulling out your ink brush and lettering your painting on the poem on your painting, but more or less about ways that you can have your cake and eat it too. Unknown caller. Sorry about that. Somebody tried to call me. Okay, have your cake and eat it too by using digital means to digitally place a poem on a digital image of your painting, and thereby keeping the painting pure, so in case you want to change your mind or just want it without the poem someday. So that's what this is going to be about. First, generally about haiga. If you look on Wikipedia, you'll find these two images. They're both by the same artist, a man called Yokoi Kinkoku, who was a disciple of haiku master Yosa Busan. Busan was a painter as well as a haiku. Haiku wasn't really quite modern haiku at the time, but these are two examples of Kinkoku's painting. The one on the left, I think, is actually a woodcut reproduction of the original ink brush painting, but it's an awfully cute one. It's a basho, and you will notice those beautiful characters in calligraphy around him. That is apparently, I don't read Japanese, much less Japanese calligraphy. That's apparently Basho's poem, Old Pond, a frog jumps into the sound of water. On the right, another of Kinkoku's paintings, a hanging scroll depicting Mount Fuji. This one's in the Metropolitan Museum. The text is well, I see, probably a quatrain, because my feeling is that far left line that's staggered down is the artist's signature. The quatrain reads, "Alone it towers above the white clouds. Who can help feeling the chill of the snow vapor? Viewed from any angle, it has no front or back, just erupts from midair to catch people's eyes." What you'll notice is a big difference in the character of the illustration. The one on the right is a high, what I sort of maybe mistakenly call a high style of scroll painting. And the one on the left is a cute little thing that we might characterize as a doodle. And that's kind of the difference between painting and haiga classically. We sort of don't quite pay attention to those distinctions these days, but do notice that on what Kenkoku can work in the high style and write a Chinese style poem, or he can do kind of a doodle little author poet image of basho and calligraphy, his haiku. So these are two of the possibilities. And notice that in the scroll painting, the poem is upper left, where on a right to left reading, you're going to scan from coming in from the bay, see the mountain, and then read the poem and reflect on what you've just seen. The haiku in the little author poet poem of Basho is sort of scattered around in the space above. Two possibilities. Note those, and you'll see some things similar crop up later in the talk. Another basho. This one is, Basho's a little bit more intricately involved with this one because it's his lifetime. The painting of a crow on a branch is Morikawa Kiyoriku. The calligraphy is apparently by Basho himself. This is what Wikimedia Commons says anyway. And it is another very famous poem of his. A crow has settled on a bare branch, autumn evening. That's Robert Haas's translation. And I look at this and I think basically what has happened here, whereas in this one, the scroll painting, it looks like the poem was written in response to what was seen in the scroll. And in this one, my feeling is that what happened probably is that although the calligraphy by Basho was put in after, my feeling is Kiyoriku has probably illustrated Basho's poem. I'm not really sure of the order of making it, but do know you have a poem illustrating. And you can sort of see that the painting is in the space. Plenty of, well, it's not white, it's sort of a beige color now, but call it the white space around the image. Still one more, a Busan itself. And I love this one because of its daring composition. There is a hydrangea dropping out of the picture on the lower, or reaching into the picture from lower left, and a bird flying in from upper right. And the poem, his calligraphy on the right, a little cuckoo, a hydrangea. So what we have is, it's important to know what's going on in this thing because it looks deceptively simple. At first glance, the poem merely describes what we see in the picture. However, hydrangea and little cuckoo, which is the Hototo Gisu, are season words, kigo, that layer the composition. They set the poem in a season and provide layering because as kigo, they have symbolic value. In other words, it's a very simple poem, but it means a lot more than what it says. The bird is for its song. Its name is onomatopoeic, and it brings a dimension of sound into the composition, just the little cuckoo. The bird's also associated with the cries of the dead who long to return and see their loved ones again. And hydrangea is also a seasonal reference associated with changing colors and sometimes refers to the fickle heart of a cheating lover. And so in sum, what this haiga is a visual pun referring to a cheating lover that has maybe caused the suicide of a woman who has gone a little bit crazy for want of reciprocating love. So it's very complex. And what you have is that amazing, huge blank space right through the middle of the composition. White space, juxtaposition. I think juxtaposition is a very harsh word for putting together images and words. I kind of like the idea that another old mentor of mine, Dennis Garrison, called it, which is dreaming room. What they often say about haiku is that its brevity and openness leaves the reader room to enter the composition and complete the experience for him or herself. And in this one, I think it's a good illustration of how haiku could do that also. And that is one of the reasons why I consider photo haiku and real haiku to be very, very different arts. Think about it. If you take a picture with your camera within the bounds of height and width of the digital file, every single pixel of the photo has information in it. There, unless you are a very, very accomplished photographer, which I am not, there's generally not much white space. And so putting a poem into a photograph is a very, very different experience than poeming your own paintings. Poeming your own paintings is a lot easier and much fewer rules. So here's a generally, I'm not going to call it a rule because I'm generally against rules, but it's sort of guidelines. The best example is when the poem does not merely describe what we see in the painting, nor does the painting illustrate the poem. I'd say that Kinkoku's Fuji comes pretty close to describing, but don't forget that it also encouraged us to respond to it. So there's a little bit of space and difference. But what you are going to want is a poem and a painting that don't totally overlap, but each brings something to the poem that's not, to the whole that's not there. So what else could there be? Sound, scent, other senses, season, time of day, a person who's not shown in the painting but is also present, or perhaps something intangible, such as an evocation of mood. I hope I haven't made that sound too complicated. I'm going to give you examples to demystify it. Do you start with the poem or with the image? It could go either way. What is important is that the poem, the haiku, is the hook on which the haiga hangs. And so what you really have to do is make sure that your text is a fully realized haiku. So the problem that I've noticed that novices to haiku, particularly photo haiku, novices to haiga, particularly photo haiku, have is that they poem the painting and don't really realize that it's not really, the text doesn't really quite add up as a standalone haiku. So well, the one way to check it is you could, I know some of you have written moon haiku or haiga in response to a challenge I put out to Yuki Teiki. You have a really nice pre-existing haiku there that you could do a painting for it. It'll probably work very nicely. But make sure at some point that you pull the haiku out of the picture and look at it. Does it make sense without the image? I'm going to show you an example of one I wrote as a bad example that doesn't really. Is it a haiku that you'd submit to a publication or share among your friends here? Does setting it to an image make the poem come into its own? Okay, so those are questions to keep in mind, and I'll show you examples in a minute. Oh dear, what I see right here is I do not have my most updated version. Well, we're going to keep going anyway. Well, let me, you know what I want to do? I want to go and find the one that is the updated version. Dorothy, as we pause right here, do you see any questions in the chat?
There are no questions so far. Maybe somebody has a question that they could just shout it out.
So it really doesn't matter then if your haiku is driven by your image or vice versa. I mean, either, well, I love the fact when we were doing our preliminary talk with you, and you said no rules. You
Right.
don't believe in those rules, that rules are meant to be broken, basically. And a lot of times I will write the haiku and then create the image.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's
Yes, exactly. And one of the things that happens is that if you have the haiku first, it's going to be strong. As my friend Alexis, that statement about the haiku being the hook on which the haiga hangs. You could go, and I'm trying not to scare everybody, but really what it comes down to is that the haiga is as strong as the haiku. It's the predominant element. This is a haiku related art. And so if you start with a haiku and then do an image, you're a step ahead. It's not so bad if you start with a painting, because paintings have so much white space or dreaming room in them if they're Sumi-e style paintings. And they're already filtered through your artistic consciousness. So what you simply need to do is look at it and think, when you're writing the poem, what else? We'll come back to this. When I say no rules, I say guidelines, rules of thumb. Rules made to be broken, I'm going to put that into two phases. It's a saying of Basho's, it's attributed to Basho, but I think it's a phony quote. Know the rules, then break them. Know the rules is important. You have to know what you're doing before you start breaking rules. But I'm going to say that I feel there is no right and wrong. I'll bring this up as a summary at the end. There is no right or wrong. Any haiga you create is a measure of where you are as an artist at the time, and it is an achievement. Okay.
well said. Well said.
Okay. So what I wanted to do is going on as we get into the practical part and get away from that overly long historical background is show you very briefly a few modern haiga practitioners if you want to see the kind of work that's been done. On the left is Stephen Addis, who's no longer with us, but he was a haiga authority who published a lot. And there's a nice one of his.
Can you go back to your sharing screen, because we're not seeing?
Oh, did I not get in the oh gosh, okay. Let me see. Yeah, all right. I got it up, but not okay. Let me see if I can manage to get the correct one up this time. So sorry. I changed stuff around in the early morning, and okay, let me see if I can. Now let's see. Oh shoot, that's the old one still. Dread. I'm so sorry. I knew some glitch was going to happen. Let me see if I can. Okay, I'm going to move the slide deck out onto desktop, move it straight onto iCloud Drive. Let me see if I can find it easily that way. Okay, this should be the correct one. I have a feeling that maybe there is a memory buffer interfering there. Let's see what happens with this one. No. Well, I'm going to have to go on without it, okay? And I'm sorry. So it's not it's previous version, but we're going to do without it. There are a few artists. Let's see. No, a very old version. Okay, here we go. There's just an extra slide. Here we go. Okay, so there's Addis on the left. In the second one is Ion Codrescu, who is, what you'll notice, let's see, Stevens, The white-haired man pauses. Which one is his home? I think it's utterly charming. I'm in a discussion at Triveni Haikai, India, led by Keiko Izawa, who says that Japanese haiku are much simpler than the haiku that we write. And so this one, I think, has the simplicity of a really nice Japanese one. And it illustrates sort of homes, but only partially by their rooms. And you will notice white space that looks like a man sort of wandering, trying to figure out which one is his. I love that one. Ian's, he has a book out. You can find it on Amazon. His style ranges from abstract to simple landscapes, and it's characterized by his very particular calligraphy. Cold day, village, boats in the bay, seagulls nowhere. Lydia Rosmus, from my balcony, everything I need, I see. Her style is more abstract. And then finally, a California friend whose work I really like is Annette Makino. She began with a style that's more etagami. I don't know, do we have etagami practitioners here?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so for those of you who like etagami and want to explore haiga, Annette's website is makinostudios.com. And she's moved to using colored papers collage, but some of her older works are pure painting, and they're all lovely. Tendrils of fog, I follow a thread back into the dream. And I'll mention something right now that I'll pick up later. When Annette puts the calligraphy, puts the poem in, I think she is one of the people who use digital means that I'll be advocating. She told me that she had a friend design a font based on her own handwriting. So that is a poem that is digitally placed into a digital scan of the original collage. And that is a really nice way to work. I found a make your own font program and tried it. It's harder than it looks, but I'm working on it. Any rate, these are people whose work, if you want to see what haiga looks like and what the options are, look them up. You can find all of these online. I've given you the sources of these, and you'll see some of Ian's in a little bit.
Linda, we were fortunate to have Annette give a presentation to Puget Sound Sumi artists a year ago and saw a lot of her work. It was wonderful.
Oh yeah, it's just absolutely lovely work.
Right, and it's on our website, sumi.org.
Wonderful. Okay, good. Thank you. Looks like the title text got overly small there. Things come out differently when I post it. Okay, so now we're going into the practical haiga, your own paintings, a guide. And these are the topics I'm going to take up. Pairing images, how to pair images and texts. I talked about that a little bit. We'll go into it in more detail. A bit about calligraphy, whether you letter your own or use a ready-made computer font or have your own font made as Annette did, and using digital fonts in the computer. A little bit about where to place text in the image. I've talked about that a little bit already. And I'll give you a slide with a list of digital tools that you can screenshot and take the resources with you. But I'm also getting to the point where I'm starting to use, okay, we had a question whether Annette's collage was digitally made too. No, if you go to makinostudios.com, you'll see process photos. Those are paper, I think did she say a birch board? A good sturdy background, and she builds them with, they look like translucent rice papers that she's using. Okay, and digital tools that can do more than just place text, because I'm starting to use my own drawings and paintings and then take them into digital apps to alter them. You'll see examples. And then finally, talking about bringing it back from the computer onto paper. Okay, pairing images and text. Again, do you start with a poem or a painting? It could go either way. I find for me the best results are often finding a poem and a painting created separately that have a certain synergy when they come together. In other words, I have now a body of poems and some paintings, and every once in a while I think a painting, I kind of want to poem that. And if I like the painting too much, it's going to maybe prevent the emergence of a good poem, but I could go into my stash of poems, find here's one with possibilities. I may have to edit it a little bit to make it fit well. But then what happens, synergy is defined as parts that when they come together are more, the whole is more than the parts. And that's kind of what you're looking for. One lights up the other. Okay, how do we choose a poem? Haiga generally means that the poem is a haiku, but other Japanese short forms like senyu or tanka work as well. And you're going to see one that's a churita. If you don't know what a churita is, I'll tell you when it comes up. And so finally, text and image linking. We have a very visually saturated world, and there are many ways that text and images can interact. But Haiga has a specific way, which is that the parts, poem and image, should be able sort of to stand alone as a painting and as a poem, but complement each other, in synergy when they come together. When I was first starting, I used to think, well, if they can stand alone, why would you want to put one with another? And that's sort of a slippery concept that I'll just have to leave you to play with. Here are some of my ideas of different ways. Optimal and not so optimal. The first one, a not so optimal, caption coup. It's a put down. I don't believe in caption coup being a put down because sometimes it's perfectly valid. When a haiku simply tells us what we can see for ourselves in the picture, or the picture shows what we read in the haiku, the picture might be simply illustrating the haiku, or the haiku simply telling us what we see in the picture. Even if the two parts are really sufficient in themselves, if you put them together, if there's too much overlap, what you'll find is a lack of interest. This one I wrote to this image, trying very hard as an example, to show you. I tried really hard to make sure there was nothing in the haiku that wasn't there for you to see in the image. Black on orange, monarch butterflies spread their wings. And it's not really very interesting. It's not really a very good haiku either. I find images and poems say things each in different ways, and it is really hard to write a good poem that says nothing that's in the image. But anyway, there's an example, and I'll just let you look at it for a moment and sort of internalize. It's sort of blah, and I wouldn't do anything with this haiku afterwards either. Next category I might call pseudo-ku or pseudo-haiku, in great part in response to the captioning problem doesn't arise quite so much in painting, because the painting is never going to become, in real haiga, a painting is never complete enough, unless you're a pre-Raphaelite painter. The painting is never complete enough to really shut out the poem completely. But in photography, it can be a caption coup can be a real problem for photo haiku. So in response to that great popularity, you'll see sometimes, a lot of times people say, the haiku and the image must not be about the same thing. That's kind of a heavy-handed approach. That isn't your problem, really, if you're working with painting. But one of the problems, particularly in photo haiku, is oh, well, I have this photo that I really love that I want a poem, but my poem shouldn't be about the same thing. And so what happens is that the novice may write a text that abstracts or generalizes or summarizes the image in an effort to avoid caption haiku and open some space. So here's another one. In all my training found this one very difficult to write either. Numbers dwindling, the causes and costs of climate change. This kind of reflects that, as Judith knows, where we go for a Yuki-Teki annual retreat at Asilomar, there is a monarch grove where the population winters over down in Pacific Grove, and the numbers are going down. It's thought in part because of habitat loss, climate change, maybe Bacillus thuringiensis and other insecticides. So the abstraction of the poem reflects real problems of monarchs, but if you take it out of the picture, numbers dwindling, the costs and costs of climate change, it's so generalized that it's really wouldn't be a very good haiku. And that's why, and in fact, without, we kind of tend these days to think that haiku is grounded in experience and observation rather than in abstraction and derivized intellectualism. So this would not be a very good haiku. And so what you do, again, put the painting aside, read the text as a standalone haiku. This is advice I gave earlier. Does it make sense as a haiku without the picture? Not really very, it's a text in haiku form, but it's not really a haiku. So I'm not going to say no, because I know scientists whose brains are trained to think this way, and I would never tell them no. And maybe, and always an artist will come along and break a rule and make it work. But just know that this is a pitfall. For me, the sweet spot, and I think for many of us who practice haiku, the sweet spot is when there's an observational connection between the picture and the haiku that each depict different aspects of the scene. What can the poem say that isn't in the picture? Can it bring in a season, time of day, more about the setting or the landscape, someone who's present, non-visual senses of sound, scent, taste, or touch? In this case, and I'm very pleased with this one, and thank you to all of you, because this is a poem that I had been struggling with. It's about the genesis of it came from that monarch overwintering ground in Pacific Grove. And it was just too what we call telly for so long. And then somehow in preparing this talk, suddenly there was the poem at my elbow the way I wanted it to be, and hadn't gotten it for 2 or 3 years. Butterfly Grove, the child in me sprouts wings. So what I've done is inserted a person, the speaker who the speaker in the guise of the poet in the artwork. So, and then the Butterfly Grove, well, it tells you a little bit more. You see a bunch of butterflies. And so it hints at the Butterfly Grove in, as for season, migrating monarchs is our, Judith, is it autumn or winter? I've forgotten which season. I think probably autumn. So migrating monarchs is autumn, but once it gets, they get to Pacific Grove, I think that when it's the grove, that's an overwintering grove. So the butterflies and the reference to the grove provide a season, and there it sort of came together. Finally, there's one that I tried, but I'm including this as another important way to work it, although I'm going to say, as I've come out with this one, it's not quite, it's not, I like it less than this one. And so this is the version, it's the keeper for me, but do know that this is here. Scent linking, when the poem and the image are connect on a different or non-literal level. The people who say, oh, the poem or the image must not be about the same thing, This is what they're striving for, Basho style scent linking. I say scent linking has to come naturally or it just looks forced. But what I have here is I found another poem, Sunny Fall Morning. It probably should be just Sunny Morning. I take my jacket just in case. That was a separate poem written just without the image. And I went through my list of poems thinking, what is a poem without butterflies that might come together with this? So that's another thing to try. And it can work very nicely. But as I said, I'm back and forth about that first line. I think the final version is not what you see there. It would be just sunny morning, which would mean the poem itself is implies sort of a changing season, that the morning is warm, but it might turn cooler. So it could be either spring or autumn. Okay, so that's about what you might do to think about how to put a poem, select a poem, or write a poem to put together with one of your paintings. Okay. Let's see. So what happened? Okay, now calligraphy. Calligraphy is the visual presentation of the poem or the text, and it is the third component of haiku. So you've got the painting, the poem, the words of the poem themselves, and how the words find their visual expression in the calligraphy. And so this section is for those of you who are primarily consider yourselves calligraphers. What I love about this little basho author portrait by Kinkoku is when I look at it, the calligraphy and the line, when they're both by the same author, you will notice that the lines of the folds of the robe and around the lines on his face, around his mouth, and that little squiggle from a brush stroke around his nose, they just have the same character as the calligraphy itself. And so what I think is that it gives a wonderful unity to this little composition. Historically, so calligraphy would have been using materials in a graphic style consistent with the painting image. That's assuming that you have the author of the image also doing the calligraphy. But you can also have a friend or collaborate. We saw that painting, the Raven painting that was done by Basho's Kiyoriku disciple, and the calligraphy by Basho. So there are collaborations within haiku. Also, haiku is really nice when you collaborate. Modern haiku, in addition to calligraphy, you could have calligraphy, old-fashioned calligraphy in modern haiku, but modern haiku in the image making also has enlarged to include Western drawing and painting media and styles, printmaking, collage, photography, and computer-generated images. And so the range of techniques for rendering the poem or the text has also widened to include digital fonts. And so if you're expanding into any of those other media, you probably should be thinking about how you gain unity between the calligraphy or the visual representation of the text and the image that you're using, because the visual unity is what is important. The traditional way to do calligraphy lettered directly on the painting in a modern form. Here's one, a tiny little one. It's about the size that I see it on my iPad screen. It's about 3 inches by 5 inches. It's a painting by Patricia Mockmiller and of Yuki Teiki, our Tokutomi Dojin. And the poem is hers, but when Patricia does things, she has a friend, Martha Dolan, who does the calligraphy for her. And so this is Marcia's, and I believe it's with a felt-tipped pen. Okay. So what you have is a collaboration right there. You don't have to do the Haiga all yourself. If you feel as I do, you will see shortly that my handwriting is chicken scratching. And you don't, I try and try and try to have patience to do calligraphy, and it doesn't seem to work all too often. But maybe because I have my monkey mind. You can collaborate, and you can collaborate with bringing in a calligrapher. You can poem somebody else's image. If you think, oh, I have an image, but I don't have a poem, get a friend to poem it. I do have some of my own here with my own handwriting. These are artist trading cards, so they're very small. I seem to be able to do my own lettering on the original. These are little Sumi-e style critters that I used with leftover tempera paint with school. The dragonfly in the upper right has a swath of turquoise colored tissue paper across the back. And then I used an ultrafine tip Sharpie for this. But I also use a lot of digital fonts because ultimately editing and changing the poem with a digital font is a lot quicker. These cases, all three of these are artist trading cards. The one in the center began as a Sumi-e image of that seashore village. The one on the left had a Sumi-e image of sanderlings, just sanderlings, and I combined it with an altered digital image from an online app called Domomo. And the one on the right began as a photograph image at Asilomar that I very much altered with a Photoshop app. So the images arise in all different directions. And what I did was to place digital fonts. All three of them, well, let's see, the one on the left is a font called Papyrus, which is a nice one. But the one is the center and the right is a font, digital font that I seem to use most often. It's called Bradley Hand. And when I think about, there's another one that I use, Noteworthy, on the iPad that I use. And I find that I use a few informal fonts that look like how I wish I could write if I had the patience. So, and the advantage is that if you have used Photoshop, you know that when you bring in a text, it comes in as a separate layer and can be manipulated and changed. So you don't commit yourself to a version, oh, I didn't want that, but I'm stuck with it now, as happens when you hand lettered with a pen directly on the image. So that's the advantage of computer fonts. And here's a page that you might want to screenshot. You do not need to spend a fortune on Photoshop because every platform has apps with text capability. You may already have some of these, or you can get them cheaply in an app store. Or there are browser-based apps also. If you have a Mac system, the newer versions of Preview have text capability. On my iPad and iPhone, I use Procreate heavily. I use Snapseed already and Autodesk Sketchbook. Fonto is a dedicated text tool that Carolyn Fitz at Yukiteki uses a lot. I have Fonto and have never really mastered it. I have been using Procreate to do my fonts and Autodesk because I just like the Procreate tools. If you have a Windows-based system, you have fewer options, but fewer options can be great stimulants for creativity. You can use MS Photos, Draw, Paint, Word Art, or just plain Word. People use Word also because there are overlap features, or you can put Word out in the margin and do your text like that. Patricia uses Word, Mac Miller uses Word. When I was editing Haiga online, I had a lot of Haiga using Word, photo Haiga using Word by Anita Virgil. And so it's perfectly adequate. If you have a Chrome tablet, although Chrome are not known for art making, Autodesk Sketchbook and Snapseed versions both exist for the Chrome platform. And that's really all you need. If you have a browser-based app, if you want browser-based apps, there's a Photoshop lookalike. I refuse to pay Adobe fees these days. So when I really need a tool that's available in Photoshop, I go over to Photopea, which is a Photoshop clone that's online. And then there are a bunch of, online editors that don't necessarily have text tools, but they have filters that you can have fun sort of tricking up your image. Lunapic, Be Funky. Canva is a good one. Kala Ramesh uses Canva. You can import your own images or use some of their prepackaged images. Kala uses the prepackaged, and she's done some really nice digital haiku with that one. Sumo Apps is highly rated, and it's available, I think, for Chromebook, but I never really mastered it, and it has too many ads for my taste.
Linda?
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
I have a question from Sally. For the novice, technologically speaking, which is the computer program that's easiest to learn and use? Now, she didn't signify whether it's for Apple, for an Apple device or an Android device, but just generally speaking, do you have any recommendations?
Easiest. I love Autodesk Sketchbook as a free download. And, if you want to, it's an Apple device. Okay. I would say if you preview has very limited image editing, but there is a text tool. Okay. Make sure that you save that you save a backup copy of your pure image, because if you put the text in the image in preview and you close it, when you open it up again, your image is no longer editable. But it is perfectly adequate for putting a nice text. There's all the fonts that you have on your Mac are there. You can move text around, you can change size, you can change color, and I recommend it, and that is really the simplest. Simplest is always to begin by looking for what you already have. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. Everybody get a screenshot. Hang on to that if you want.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. Okay, so where to place text in the image? If you remember Annette, she put hers in the upper corner. If you've painted the image first and weren't thinking about poeming it, you may have difficulty finding room. A frequent recourse is to tuck the poem into an empty corner, because particularly in painting, we tend to do less with the corners, and there will be spaces in the corners that have less going on, that the text will stand out more. These are two of mine. The one on the left, there's a bit of color in that painting. There's a bit of blue watercolor for the falls, but this is the black and white version that went into the Yuki Teiki anthology. And I've been back and forth about my chicken scrawling font. In this case, I did hand letter. So how did I do that? Because the painting is still intact and it's a digital image. What I did is took a leaf from my ink brush painting teacher. What he does is, when you're starting, he hasn't talked about putting poems in, but when he's teaching everybody how to do calligraphy and sign and put a chop in, what he will do is mock up the calligraphy on a separate piece of paper and try it in different places temporarily to see where he likes it. So what I did with this text is letter it on a separate piece of paper, and tried several times until I got one that I thought my chicken scratching was reasonably presentable. And then I scanned that too. And I brought it into the digital image of the painting as a separate layer above the painting. And if you've worked with layers, you know, in Photoshop or Procreate has them too, as does Snapseed. There's what's called layer blending, which is that the program will have different ways that you can sort of mix. And for layer blending, if I, for instance, click the layer blending mode to ask simply for the darker color, that scrap of paper for the text will disappear, because the darker color is the text. And in the background image, the darker color is the slight coloration on the rock cliffs and the waterfalls. So suddenly, bingo, there's a text there, and you can't see that it was scanned separately, but I could move it around and I can adjust the size until I get it where I want it. And so if you like your own handwriting but don't to do digital, this is one really good way to go. Letter the poem separately, put it on a piece of paper, use a program that will allow you to use layers. The one on the right is one that is the system I use more often. And what I do is I go looking for a font that sort of matches. This one I had done, actually, I think it was not with a bamboo brush, it was with a Western acrylic brush. And probably a black acrylic paint. So the font I chose was one called Chalk Duster because it has a dry brushy look to it. And the way I'm working these days, because I use Procreate, I lettered the text in a text layer, and then you can sort of adjust. Procreate has tools for distorting and warping. And so what I do is I stagger the text a little bit. I adjust it. You notice that sometimes slants up a little bit, and there is a little bit of size difference. You notice the two I wish I might, the eyes are different size. And so what I have been trying to do, without going fully the way Ian Codrescu does his, I'm trying to give it a little bit more of an irregular handwritten look. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In the upper, sometimes if you have clear upper space, sometimes the sky is important as an empty space, but sometimes it's a good space to put the poem. On the left is the poem that is a charita. Charita was invented by I. Lee. Larry Kimmel has a whole charita publication that he does now. They're kind of can look a little like haiku if you write haiku-ish versions. It's one line, three stanzas, a one-line stanza, a two-line stanza, and a three-line stanza, and they can come in any order. So this one was a poem that had been stuck for many years until I found charita form. Art class, the little girl who always works so slowly makes a glazed ceramic turtle. And this comes from the idea comes from when I was a clay teacher, and it was a little girl literally who just made one thing and to work very, very slowly and deliberately on it. And the poem comes from, the picture comes from a completely different place. I was just into painting turtles in my ink brush painting class one week. But the two of them went, I think, really well together. The font is one called Festus. The one on the right is Bradley Hand, warped with Procreate. This one has been accepted for modern haiku for next year. Now, I haven't done this, so I've this approach, but so I've included two examples of Ian Codrescu's. the same poem, Seagrasses, The Way They Lean into the Water. It's a poem by Elsa Colligan. He does a lot of Sumi-e for other people's poems. He has a whole book of them. This one published, the one on the left, version on the left from North Carolina Haiku Society, and the one on the right is at the Haiku Foundation. And what interested me about it is that it's written not quite in Enso. It's sort of Enso meets Hokusai's Great Wave. And what I'm interested about it is that the text has been centered here. It's not tucked in around the painting. It looks like it's the center of interest. My feeling is, even particularly in the left one, that he may have lettered the text first and then did the painting around it. On the one on the right, it looks like he could have planned where the text is going to go, then did the swirl, lettered the text, and then realized, you see there's a slightly waterlogged splotch right under the way, between the way and lean into. That looks like it may have been added a little bit later, but this one has more of a type of unity. And I haven't done it yet, but I'd like to try something like this. Notice that on the one version on the left, the text is much more centered. And on the right, it kind of looks like the text has been sort of washed up by the wave itself. I like this one because it reminds me very much of the kelp forests in the breakers when you're standing by the sea at Asilomar. You can see the kelp being, not the seagrasses, kelp being tugged by the waves, and as they sort of get pulled up and then collapse down in the wave. So this one, both versions really speak to me. They just have slightly different purposes, but this is a way that you could do it too. And finally, if there's no good place for the poem in the image, if you have digital image, you can, okay, Sally wants to address where signatures go. If there's no good place for the poem in the image, you can place the image in, slightly drag the corners of the image a little bit smaller, create a space around it. Here's my one photo haiku with a tanka. The guy who always dominates meetings complains we never get anything done. I guess that's a kyoka rather than a tanka. But what I did in that case is to create a sidebar on the left for the poem, because there really wasn't any place that I wanted it in the image. And when you put the poem to the side, you get more or less a companionship. And it's really not a bad way of linking. It's more side by side with equality. In this particular case, another tanka, this one was published in Modern Haiga years ago. What I did was to drag the border, a narrower border around the top and two sides, and then a broader section of frame for underneath. Rain-splattered windows of the uptown bus. An office girl reading her dog-eared Pride and Prejudice. This one was originally an ink, just a big splash of an ink brush with flying whites in it, and I took it into Photoshop and then used the wave feature cranked up to the fullest just to see what would happen, and it gave this sort of irregular woven pattern, so which looked rain splash to me. That's where that came from. So, and now I noticed a question dealing with signatures. I have a chop. Let's see, did I include my chop anywhere? Okay, here's my chop in here. Sometimes I include it, sometimes not. I see I didn't include it on the Lotus pad. I probably should have. Where you include the painting, the chop in the, if we go really back to those beginnings, the first few that I showed you, they're frequently top sometimes on the left margin, sometimes on the right. I've watched my ink brush teacher, and he tends to put, haven't quite figured out where he puts them. There's a nice one down lower. As you know, in Western painting, there's one down there, chop and signature, lower right. In Western painting, we kind of expect it lower right, because we read top left to lower right. And so these artist signature and the chop sort of serve as a ceremony of completion. And lower right is going to be the last place that our Western oriented eyes read as we're moving out of the picture. Looks like Addis put his chop over there. It's wherever you feel you want that red dot. I noticed I didn't sign these because in my own mind, the butterflies were not yet completed. I hadn't thought them through yet. There we have Patricia's signature under the poem, or her initials lettered by Martha under the poem, and then a chop at the lower right. I sometimes put them, okay, wherever. It looks like this one got turned on its side, so that it should have been vertical with the chop in the lower right. I tend to sign lower right. Not everybody does. And sometimes I tuck them into a place where they're kind of unobtrusive into the brushwork, somewhere in the region of the lower right. Like this one, not quite lower right, but sort of near it. Anybody else say any other thoughts? Or, oh, here's one. It's up in the painting. Okay, did that sort of answer questions?
Yes, it did. I usually, in my Western calligraphy teaching, I always talk about how important the signature is and needs to be incorporated into the total design. And I was just curious about what your thinking was. And I would say lower right is probably, when it works, lower right is the best place for our Western work.
Yeah, agree.
And one of our presenters, is Dorothy, one of our presenters told us that that chop signifies the authenticity, so that it should be placed under the signature. So that would be something to consider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing, particularly if you're getting into collaborations, I notice let's see, in this one, you will notice this one's a collaboration because the poem is Elsa's. You will notice that what he has done, the way he has handled it, is he put Elsa's name right under the poem, and his own signature with chop is towards lower right-hand corner. And let's see how he handled it. Did the same thing over in this one. So don't forget, if you also probably want to put it somewhere that it indicates, if it's your poem and your calligraphy and your painting, the only person's name that's going to be in it is you. So you can just put your signature. Now, these being artist trading cards, the backside would have had my full name and contact information. If you have, let's see, where did I'm doubling back to find Patricia's. The one thing I know that this is Martha's handwriting, but Martha didn't credit herself as the calligrapher in there. Although I know when they have done larger paintings and gallery show, there have been one case with Floyd Zitten did the paintings of a bird painter, a friend of Patricia's, and Patricia wrote the haiku and Martha lettered them. All three of them were credited. So you do need to find out what works for you and for your composition. But if there's somebody else who wrote the poem, you need to credit the author of the poem. And not necessarily, well, the calligrapher probably, it would be good to credit the calligrapher, but on the other hand, you don't want to clutter the painting with too much text. So you kind of have to decide what you're going to do.
Well, see, the Elisa Colligan signatures are sort of annoying, and I feel like they fight with Eon's signature. It sort of fragments the painting. It would feel better, I think, if even though it's her signature relates to the poem and is under the poem, I still think it would be better if both the signatures were somehow grouped together.
That's a possibility. I think if I were doing it, I would put her signature slightly larger and in about the place where Ian put his own signature. And I would put his own, considering this is not a really elaborate painting, and maybe his Haiga, but I think I would have gone to just simply initials and chop and maybe put it up a little bit higher in the painting and out of the way, and give it, because it is her painting. And
that sounds good.
Yeah, she deserved a more prominent place in it. So anyway, yeah, but that's an interesting thought. It's going to be different for everybody. And so that's just one of the things that you have to think about if you get into a collaboration. Sometimes people may put their signatures in a couple of, that it's their painting and their poem, put their own signature under the poem, and then sign the painting also. And but there comes a point where the visual clutter robs from the art of the painting, I think. What I see for people who do photo haiku is lots of times people, for instance, use photos from Wikipedia comments. And then you have to letter the credit to the artist, to the photographer who put his artwork in Wikipedia comments, and probably even if there's constraints on the licensing, you might have to put that in the painting, and then you haiga by, so you can wind up with a credit, photo by so and so, haiku by so and so, haiga by so and so, and then it can really get cluttered up. And then by the time there are people who are obsessive about putting a copyright sign in, you don't need a copyright symbol. Anything that is yours, if you can prove, if you keep a copy of it and could show that it's dated copy of it and show that it's yours, you don't need a copyright. It's automatically copyright to you. And it's not really any protection anyway, because if people like your work, they'll Photoshop your picture out, your signature and copyright symbol out of it if you put it on the web. But yeah, that's a point about signatures. The signature becomes part of the painting. Decide where you want that little dot of red. Decide whether you want initials. Decide whether you want a full signature. I think when I look at mine, not in that case, let's see, double back. What you see for this one, I sort of monkey, that's Bradley, the signature LMP, that Linda Mori Papanicolau, that's the signature, the artist initials I use. And I tweak the baseline and the kerning a little bit to produce more of a cartouche. And I generally make it a little smaller than the text, but make it go with the text. Did the same thing here, full signature, but the chop there in that one. The source of the chop is my middle name was Mori, M-O-R-E-Y. And some Japanese students once years ago told me, said, well, write your name in Japanese. This was at middle school. This happened to me. Write your name in Japanese. And they didn't do hiragana. They gave me a kanji instead. We're going to do something different from you. And I was sort of shocked, and I didn't think about it for years. But when I felt I needed a chop, well, yeah, there it is waiting for me. That one's mine. It's the kanji for forest, which is mori, M-O-R-I in Japanese. Okay, so let me sort of bring this to a close, and then we can open more for discussion. One of the things that I am doing is I also, so I've got a lot of these haiga, even if the painting was originally on paper. I've photographed, I don't scan, the scanner bleaches them out too much, but I do have a light stand, and I use either the iPad or the iPhone to just take a photo on the light stand. And if I have a digital image and place a text in, I wind up with a haiga, an original painting with no text, and a haiga that is digital. And so sooner or later, what am I going to do? Shall I try to start publishing some of these? One of the things I've discovered is that sometimes you need a little bit of final filtering to pull it all together. So let's see, I'm not sure I have one. Let's see, no, I didn't include one that's filtered. Snapseed has some that apply slight vignetting filters to sort of tie everything together and also make the text look like it goes a little bit better with the painting. They sort of even up the colors and make the brush strokes more alike. So it may be a simple little bit of image tweaking and optimizing and adjusting in Procreate or Snapseed. But I've also started using my digital paintings the way I used to use photographs. If I say that photograph right here, this was not the original photograph. I think you could see it's been sort of tricked up with filters to narrow the colors and sort of higher contrast. I would have used Photoshop with this one. So here's one that I included 3 versions to show you the process of what I do now. I had an original painting that I did that I kind of liked. And then I decided I wanted to poem it. And the poem that I selected was Lengthening Shadows, the GPS Leads Us Back to the Trailhead, which was a poem that I wrote without a thought for this painting. And I tried putting it in the painting. I submitted it to publication. It was not one that was picked up or accepted. And I looked at it and I thought, well, one of the reasons why is that I don't think that the mood of that haiku, lengthening shadows, the GPS leads us back to the trailhead, the two don't meet because, you know, it doesn't look like an evening of lengthening shadows. The colors are not that way. So I started playing around. I started trying to go blues and things like this. And I took it into another program that I have called Prisma, which is a download you can get from the Mac App Store. I have artist friends who use and another haiku friend who introduced me to it. And I came up with, let's see if I can, this one. I thought that's kind of interesting because with a little bit of blue, you know, this is just messing around with all kinds of different filters. Looking, do I like this one? No. Do I like that one? No. What if I adjust this one? And it reduced it to the bare minimum. And I thought, well, by removing the information of the green, suddenly it looks like it goes a little better. The other thing is that I put the whole thing, the text was in this painting when I put it in. So the filter gave the font, it was Bradley hand font, but the filter gave it a consistency with what the filter was doing to my line drawings of the painting. So, okay, that's kind of nice. And if I need a black and white photo, I would probably use this one as part of a collage, maybe. You know, center it with collage of pieces of paper around the edge or something like that. I haven't quite figured out. But then I went to another font with for another haiku friend, haiku artist friend, Michael Henry Lee in Florida, put me onto a program called Picasso. And I also used Prisma. And I came up with this one. And I think that for reasons I don't quite know, this one, the green is still there, but somehow or another, what it did to the background mountains sort of looks to me like the ominousness of gathering shadows and, ooh, we better get home. I noticed that the little gold, the housings, the little houses, the shelters there are gone from both versions, but that's all right. And I think so for the time being, at least, this is the version that I'm going to like. But bear in mind, when you do this, you've still got the original painting. And if you've saved a backup copy, you have the original version also. So this is, I'm sort of coming full scale around, and the ink brush painting is becoming kind of a tool for ink brush based images, the way my photo haiku used to be photo based images. And it just opens, so digital tools open up all kinds of possibilities. So bringing it back from computer to paper. Sooner or later, maybe you want to print out. So one thing you should be aware of is that if you're printing out, printout resolution is 300 ppi. If you're going for a digital publication, it's only, for an online journal or something, it's only 72 ppi, pixels per inch. But 300 ppi is what will give you a good quality paper printout. So what you do need to know is make sure at every stage you've been working that you have a good big file with high resolution. One of the things that I've done is what's going on here? Okay. Greeting cards let's see, what on earth happened? Damage. It was fine when I looked at it. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to stop share and go back to one of the older versions and see what I can find. So sorry about this. It was fine when I checked it this morning. Let me see.
It may be taking a little longer to set up.
That's possible. Let me go back to it and see what's going on, Judith. I'll go back, see if I can go back to the, okay, some of the raw, okay, maybe some of the raw files that I have here. Well,
Well, Linda, we're getting a little bit short on time, so
okay,
maybe we can just.
Why don't I just say this then? I print out into artist books. I use them for greeting cards, and you also can make brochures and all sorts of other stuff. So you can take them back into paper printouts. That last part wasn't so important. But I have a lot of fun doing that, and it has led me into artist books. Okay, so let me bring it to an end with that then.
Okay, and we lost your picture somehow. Your video is gone of you.
How strange. There we go. Okay. Okay, so any rate, that's it. It can be a huge practice. What I would recommend to you is, my final slide, which I won't go back to, is to say what I hope you get out of this is first that it's not daunting to put poems into your ink brush paintings. And if you feel that you want to keep the ink brush painting as they are and without text, but you want to text in it, you can have your cake and eat it too by using digital tools. And above all, as I'm going to say this again, if you're a novice, a beginner, if you don't write many haiku, and you want to try to get into it, or you can use longer texts or anything you want, but there are no, as far as I am concerned, there are no rules. And say it again, every painting and haiku that you do is a reflection of who you are as an artist and as a writer at that time. And keep them, and life is a growth experience. And there is no right and wrong.
I think that's an important message.
Thank you very much, Linda. There is
Thank you.
lots of good
Thank you.
information for us in your presentation. Thank you very much.
It was all very helpful, especially
was
for our
great.
Haiga group.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. It
Well,
was so
let me say
great.
something about the haiku group. My understanding is that Dorothy gave everybody a copy of the Moon Challenge we had within Yukiteki, and so she's forwarded me a bunch of very lovely moon haiku and haiga. And so here's the problem. I'd love to include them in the slideshow that I'm compiling from people who were at the meeting, people who were not, Yukiteki members who were not at the meeting but send things afterwards. And I'd love to include yours also. But my question to Dorothy was, did people understand that I might put these, that these could go into a slideshow? So if you sent one to her, and it's okay with you, I'll share the slideshow with Dorothy and she can share it with you. But would you send her your permission? If you want to hold it because you want to publish it somewhere else, I will understand, but she will let me know who is given permission and I'll put them in the slideshow.
Thank you.
Judith has
I
one in
think
the
people would
slideshow.
be honored. People would be honored to know that you use their haiku in your slideshow.
Well, I still want to make sure,
Yeah,
because
so
the worst mistake you can make is to pre-publish something that somebody was saving.
right. And what I send you, I can send you a copy of that with everybody's approval. I won't send any in.
I'll take your word for it. I don't need written approval. Just, tell me who has sent you there. Okay.
Okay. That's good.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to thank you, especially for me, the way you so simply broke down the caption coup, the pseudo coup, and observational connection, because that whole question of the relationship between the image and the poem is something that we can always use clarification on, and I think that made it really, really clear. And
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
You did. That was great.
Are there any more questions? I don't see any more in the text.
Hey, well then I think we can hold on here. I'm going to come back to, I don't see where I can change the spotlight, but I'm going to put something up here that I can't remember if I shared it with you before, but I was part of an Edagami exchange over the course of the last year that just ended last month, and received some wonderful Edagamis. And this was the last one that I received, and I think it's a good message to everybody. I loved it. So Here you go. Pin. Hold on. There we go. So with that, I wish you all a happy October, and let's stay in touch.
Thank you
Thank
very,
you,
very much for
everyone.
inviting
And
me.
thank you again, Linda.
Thank you for inviting me.
Linda.
Thank you very much.
Very helpful.
Okay, see you later.